On Whitaker Street, in the historic heart of Savannah, the small bakery sat quietly, the refrigeration unit hummed steadily, filling the empty space with a mechanical rhythm. Behind the glass cases, where pastries, pies, and cakes once gleamed, only a few lonely remnants remained, a pair of eclairs she couldn't bring herself to throw away, a small tart without a home. Under the fluorescent lights, they felt almost mocking, a reminder of how far her dream had slipped. Claire Bennett wiped the shelves with a vinegar-based cleaner, its faintly sharp scent, harsher than butter and sugar should ever be. Each stroke of the cloth felt heavier than the last. She glanced at the chalkboard menu, once bright with whimsical handwriting promising sweet moments to passers-by. Now the chalk marks were faint, smudged by time and neglect, like the dream itself. It had been 2 years since opening. 2 years since she convinced herself that Savannah's locals and tourists would flock to her red velvet, lemon bars, and pecan pies. She had imagined children laughing with frosting on their lips, couples sharing slices beneath moss-draped oaks. Instead, there was silence, broken only by the occasional beep of the square reader tallying a sparse sale. The landlord's letters had grown sharper, more impatient. The last one had skipped pleasantries, issuing a blunt demand. The bank's emails were worse, bold reminders like final notice pressing down each time she opened her inbox. Suppliers had been lenient at first, offering grace periods, but even kindness has limits. Claire touched the crack in the corner of the front display glass, one she'd noticed the first week she opened. Back then, it seemed minor, just a delivery box brushing the edge. But over months, that fracture had grown in her mind, not just in the glass, but in her confidence. A tiny fault line spreading until the foundation of her resolve felt unstable. She turned off the overhead lights, leaving only the kitchen glow. The stainless steel counters reflected the light softly, less clinical, more forgiving. For a moment she let herself imagine being simply a baker, a woman with flour on her apron and hope in her chest. But the numbers were clear. The upcoming weekend was a silent deadline. If nothing changed, she would call the landlord Monday morning, surrender the keys and tell herself it wasn't failure, just a break. Americans liked softer words. She knew better. It would be the end. Leaning against the counter, she closed her eyes, recalling opening day. The scent of fresh cinnamon rolls had filled the street. A few curious passers-by had come in, charmed by the chalkboard signs and her nervous smile. This is it. This is where I belong, she had told herself. Weeks of adrenaline and caffeine had followed, certain her dream was unstoppable. But dreams wear down against rent, slow winters, and bills that don't wait for inspiration. Each month chipped away at her resolve until only exhaustion remained. She wiped the glass again, staring at hollow reflections. Her grandmother had always said baking was about making people feel cared for, yet lately the bakery felt more like a burden, an anchor dragging her down. She sighed, dropping the rag onto the counter. At least the shelves were clean. Maybe that would make saying goodbye easier. Just then, the doorbell chimed. Startled, she nearly knocked over the napkin holder. Customers at this hour were rare. She turned, expecting a lost tourist or someone wandering drunk, but the figure was neither. An elderly man stood framed in the doorway, holding it with a trembling hand. His tweed overcoat seemed from another era, and his face bore lines of dignity thinned by worry. Pale blue eyes held desperation and raw urgency. "Excuse me," he said, voice gravelly. "Are you still open?" Claire blinked, unsure. Technically she wasn't, but something in his presence stopped her from sending him away. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "We started just about closed." The man stepped inside, closing the door carefully. He removed a handkerchief from his pocket, holding it like a talisman. "My name's Seps Thomas Montgomery," he said urgently. "Tomorrow is my wife Sep's 80th birthday. We Sep's been married 55 years. And his voice faltered, eyes lowered in shame. I forgot to order her cake." Claire's breath caught. He wasn't just a customer, he was a husband weighed down by guilt. His words filled the silent shop, pressing against the emptiness that had lingered for months. For the first time in a long while, Claire felt her heart quicken, not for bills or deadlines, but for the quiet desperation of someone asking for one last chance. Thomas stood in the bakery's steps glow, hand still gripping the handkerchief. I don't set know how I let this happen, he murmured. Tomorrow is my wife Sep's birthday. 80 years. We'd been married 55 years. He paused, and I forgot the cake. His confession hung like a verdict. Claire said nothing at first. She was used to last-minute requests, cupcakes for school events, pies before Thanksgiving, but never with this kind of weight. I walked half the city tonight, Thomas continued, voice cracking. Every bakery I could find was closed, or said no. They told me I should have ordered weeks ago. They were right. But I can sit show up empty-handed. Not after everything she sits endured this year. His mention of his wife softened his tone. Claire noticed his trembling fingers on the counter. Her name is Evelyn, he said, eyes lighting up with memory. Seb's been in and out of the hospital all year, heart trouble. Seb spent months managing her medicine, appointments, watching her sleep with tubes and monitors. I lost track of this one thing, and she loves her birthday cake. He unfolded a crumpled piece of paper with shaky notes. It doesn't need to be grand, no frills, just red velvet with cream cheese frosting. A single sugar rose in the center. She always says a cake isn't dressed without one. The request was modest, heartfelt. Claire felt something stir. It had been long since anyone asked for anything beyond menu choices. She saw in his eyes a husband desperate to give his wife one more moment of joy. Reality intruded. She thought of her pantry: flour, sugar, eggs, yes. Cocoa, yes, but cream cheese, butter, vanilla beans, carefully rationed. The last block of cream cheese sat in the fridge, intended for a cake she might never sell. Her last 2 vanilla beans were tucked away for something special. Could this request be the something special? Still, hesitation tugged. She'd promised herself she'd close by Monday. More work, more hours, more strain on scarce ingredients. Thomas seemed to read her conflict. He pulled out his wallet. Please, pay whatever you ask. Tonight, just name the price. Claire shook her head. No, she said softly. Steady. I still make it. You still pay tomorrow, if it sests what you hoped for. Relief and disbelief flickered in his eyes. For a moment, he looked decades younger. He laughed breathlessly, almost boyish. 10 o'clock, Claire confirmed. I'll be here at 9:55, he promised. Still clutching the handkerchief, he pressed her hand with both of his. You don't know what this means. Thank you. The bell jingled as he left. The bakery felt different, not empty, but expectant. Claire exhaled, clearing the dust of despair from her lungs. She tightened her apron and went into the kitchen. From the top shelf, she retrieved a worn cloth-bound notebook, its pages smelling faintly of flour and sugar. Her grandmother's handwriting sprawled across the lines, recipes with looping script, notes in the margins. Don't rush the frosting. Patience is flavor. She flipped to red velvet. The words felt like a promise. Her grandmother had always said, a cake should whisper, not shout. Evelyn's request for a single rose now made perfect sense. It wasn't about grandeur, it was about love, distilled into simplicity. Claire turned on the oven. The hum of heat filled the kitchen. She laid out her remaining ingredients: the cocoa she'd saved, the butter wrapped in wax paper, the vanilla beans she had kept for something special. She pulled down bowls, measured flour carefully, and began the rhythm she knew: whisk, sift, fold, stir. The scent of cocoa bloomed rich and grounding. Outside, Savannah slept. Inside, the bakery stirred alive again. For the first time in months, Claire felt purpose beyond ledgers and bills. She worked through the night, preparing to place the cake in Thomas Montgomery's hands. Perhaps this forgotten cake could mean more than either of them realized. The oven hummed steadily. She tied back her hair, rolled her sleeves, and placed her grandmother's notebook on the counter. Measure with care. Don't rush the soul out of it. She sifted flour like snow into the bowl, added cocoa, the scent sharp and sweet, carrying possibility. The mixer stirred the batter, rhythm steady like a wakeful lullaby. Eggs cracked, mixtures folded, sides scraped, each gesture deliberate. The glossy crimson batter reminded her of childhood summers in her grandmother's kitchen. Lace curtains fluttered, sugar dust sparkled in sunlight. A cake should whisper, not shout, her grandmother had said, tapping her wooden spoon. Claire poured the batter into lined pans. The oven door closed. Cocoa's bittersweet aroma filled the bakery. She inhaled deeply, comforted. Hours passed in small increments. Oven dings, steam rising from baked layers, cream cheese frosting, whipped smooth. The world outside faded. Tourists gone, carriages silent, Spanish moss swaying gently. Inside, life pulsed again. Cakes cooled, trimmed, layered, frosted with precision. The final frosting spread like untouched snow. Claire adjusted the lamp, warm light spilling across the counter. Then she made the rose, sugar melted, turned clear, then amber whisked off at just the right moment. Petal by fragile petal, a single bloom took shape, delicate and luminous. She placed it on the cake, catching the lamplight like glass. At dawn, Claire stepped back. Before her stood not just a cake, but a red velvet layered with cream cheese frosting, crowned with a sugar rose that whispered of love, memory, and devotion. The exhaustion she expected never came. Instead, there was quiet pride, a sense of purpose she thought long gone. She slid the cake into a white box, the kind reserved for weddings that never came. Tying the ribbon felt like sealing something sacred. The bakery remained quiet, but no longer empty. The silence now carried weight and expectation, as if the walls themselves waited to see what would unfold. At 9:45, the doorbell chimed softly. Thomas Montgomery entered slowly, cautious but eager. His coat looked heavier in the morning light, and his face was pale from a sleepless night. When his eyes fell on the box resting on the counter, he froze. Claire lifted the lid gently, revealing the cake. Sunlight struck the sugar rose, making it glisten like morning dew. For a moment, Thomas just stared. Then his breath caught, tears spilling over before he could stop them. He reached across the counter, grasping her hand with both of his firm. Despite a slight tremor, his voice, hushed and reverent, broke the silence. "This is her cake. It sets the one she sets always loved. You don't set know what you sev done for me." Claire's throat tightened, her own eyes stinging. She managed a small nod, unable to speak. In that moment, the debts, the landlord's letters, the bank's warnings, all faded. What mattered was the man holding her hand, and the joy that would soon light his wife's face. Even if Sweet Moment closed forever, even if Monday meant the end, at least this night had been worth it. At last, Claire remembered why she became a baker. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe her work still had meaning. The Montgomery home buzzed with voices and laughter. Though a subtle unease lingered, relatives filled the living room. Children ran through the hallways, their squeals bouncing off old plaster walls. The dining table groaned under casseroles, roasted vegetables, a glazed ham and bowls of fruit. Wine glasses clinked as adults conversed, keeping the atmosphere cheerful. Yet something crucial was missing. At the center of the long table, where the celebration's crown should have been, there was only empty space. No cake, no candles, no centerpiece. Guests glanced at it occasionally, quickly averting their eyes, as if ignoring the absence could fill it. Evelyn Montgomery sat at the head of the table, a silk shawl draped over her shoulders, silver hair carefully set, lipstick soft rose. She smiled as grandchildren presented handmade cards and small bouquets. She laughed when a boy sneaked an extra roll, listened patiently as nieces asked after her health. But her hands betrayed her. They trembled slightly when lifting her glass. Her eyes, though kind, carried shadows of disappointment. For 55 years, her birthdays had been marked by the same ritual: a red velvet cake with cream cheese frosting and a single sugar rose. It wasn't just dessert, it was tradition, memory. It was her husband saying, "I remember, I see you, you matter." And this year, the table was bare. From across the room, granddaughter Caroline observed with precision. At 32, she was one of Savannah's most respected food critics, capable of making or breaking restaurants. Tonight, however, her pen was idle. She was only a granddaughter, watching helplessly as her grandmother masked disappointment with polite laughter. Leaning toward her grandfather earlier, she asked softly, "You forgot, didn't you?" Thomas's face fell, guilt deepening lines in his weary features. He nodded shamefully. "I tried, Carl. I swear I tried. Every shop I went to was closed, or they said no. I failed her." His eyes watered. Caroline turned away, unable to witness the plain regret. As the night wore on, Caroline feared the moment was slipping beyond repair. She imagined her grandmother going to bed with that hollow space in her heart, her 80 years marked by absence rather than joy. Then, just as the room's air felt heavier, the front door swung open. Thomas Montgomery stepped inside. Breathless, coat dusted with evening chill, in his arms a large white bakery box, tied with string. The room fell silent. Conversations cut short. Even the children froze. "I found it," Thomas announced, voice a mix of relief and pride. "We have a cake." He walked to the table, placing the box carefully in the empty space. His hands lingered on the lid reverently. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The anticipation was palpable. With slow, deliberate care, Thomas untied the string and lifted the lid. Gasps swept the room. There it was, a red velvet cake of striking beauty, cream cheese frosting smooth and flawless, white as fresh snow. At its center rested a single sugar rose, delicate and luminous, catching the light like morning dew. The cake seemed almost too perfect to eat. Evelyn lifted her hands to her face, eyes welling. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, voice trembling. "It's beautiful. The most beautiful cake I've ever seen." Tears streamed down her cheeks, not of disappointment, but of joy, gratitude, and love renewed. She reached for her husband's hand. He covered hers gently, murmuring, "Happy birthday, my love." Applause broke out, first tentative, then swelling. Children clapped, adults smiled, some wiping eyes. Laughter and cheer filled the house. The empty space on the table had transformed into the night's centerpiece. Caroline stepped forward, her critic's eye drawn to the cake's detail, the even layers, smooth frosting, artistry of the rose. She accepted a slice, brought the fork to her lips. The first bite stilled her. Moist and tender, the cake balanced sweetness with a faint tang of buttermilk. The cocoa added depth. The cream cheese frosting was rich. The sugar rose melted like a whisper. But it wasn't just flavor, it was something intangible, almost spiritual. Caroline lowered her fork slowly, strict composure faltering. "Quietly," she said, "this isn't just a cake, this is art." The room hushed. Family members exchanged surprised looks. Caroline, known for razor-sharp reviews, rarely gave such praise. Evelyn reached for her granddaughter's hand, smiling through tears. "It's perfect, isn't it?" Caroline nodded. "It's more than perfect, it's honest." Thomas looked astonished. Then back at the cake, heart swelling with pride and relief. The forgotten order, frantic search, and a baker's kindness had led to this moment of redemption. As the first candles were lit, and everyone sang, Evelyn's eyes sparkled brighter than the flames. The cake was not just dessert, it was proof that love, even when nearly forgotten, could still be remembered. In that crowded room, surrounded by family, no one doubted the miracle on the table. Later, after the last candle was blown and the final slice savored, Caroline returned to her apartment. Lamplight illuminated her notebook and laptop. As a critic, she wrote with precision. But tonight she wrote as a granddaughter who had witnessed something profoundly human. Her article began simply "One forgetful grandfather and the most honest cake in Savannah." She recounted Thomas's panic, his search and the encounter with Claire, who chose compassion over profit. She described the cake, but more importantly, its meaning, her grandmother's tears, her family's joy, and Caroline's own stunned reaction as a critic. "This cake was not just baked," she wrote. "It was given. Food at its best is love in edible form. When we lose bakers like Claire Bennett, we lose more than a business. We lose what makes life meaningful." She hit publish, unaware of the ripple it would send. By midnight, the article spread across Savannah's online community. By dawn, hundreds had shared it on social media with captions like, "This made me cry. Support bakers with soul." Comments poured in, "Where is this bakery? I'll drive across town for a slice. Bake my wedding cake." Stories of family traditions and moments where food spoke louder than words flooded the thread. The next morning, Claire awoke to her phone buzzing. Groaning, she assumed reminders from banks or suppliers. But notifications kept coming. Messages, missed calls, emails. She pulled on a sweater, heart racing, and opened her email. Dozens of inquiries, weddings, anniversaries, corporate orders. Hands trembling, she powered up her old laptop. When the homepage of Savannah's top lifestyle site loaded, her breath caught. Caroline Montgomery's article stretched across the screen, with a photo of the sugar rose glistening in light. Claire read in stunned silence. Caroline had described not just the cake, but the late-night hours. Her decision to bake when she could have closed, the soul she poured into it. The comment section overflowed. "Where is this bakery? I want her to bake my wedding cake." This made me believe in people again. The phone rang. "Good morning," said a polite male voice. "I'm calling from Magnolia Catering. We read about you. We'd like a corporate order. 50 guests." Another call came. Texts buzzed. Instagram notifications piled up. Her small account had grown from hundreds to thousands overnight. Claire stared at the empty shelves behind the counter. Just yesterday, she had been ready to close for good. Now the city had found her. She sat at the table, sunlight warming her face, letting the truth sink in. She wasn't forgotten. She wasn't invisible. One cake, baked in desperation and love, had shifted everything. The landlord's letter remained unopened. The bank would surely call, but deep inside, something stirred. Hope. By sunset, Claire Bennett had nearly emptied the bakery. Customers streamed in from the moment she unlocked the door until long past closing. Some carrying printed articles, others repeating lines from social media. She baked and sold until shelves were bare. Even the jar of stale cookies was emptied. Finally, the bakery fell quiet, but different from the night before. Boxes stacked haphazardly, the sink full of mixing bowls, the smell of butter and sugar lingering. Claire pulled off her flour-dusted apron and sank into a chair near the front window. Her body ached, feet throbbed, but exhaustion was tempered by wonder. The bell jingled softly. Claire startled. "My sorry," she called, voice weary. "We sawed her closed for the night." "That sep's all right," came a warm, measured reply. "I didn't set come for pastries." A woman stepped inside, tall, dark hair pulled back, coat draped over her shoulders. Eyes sharp, assessing, softened by a hint of a smile. She extended a hand. "Caroline Montgomery." Recognition hit instantly. Claire rose, wiping hands on her apron before shaking. "I find now what to say." "Maybe start with thank you," Caroline said lightly. Expression kind, then shook her head. "No, I should apologize. I didn't realize my article would explode like this." Claire gave a faint laugh. still dazed. A storm? Yes. I've never seen anything like it. Yesterday, I thought I'd be closing this place for good. Today, I couldn't keep up. Claire gestured helplessly toward the empty display cases. Everything had sold out. Caroline glanced around the bakery, taking in the chipped paint, the squeaky ceiling fan, and the worn linoleum floors. To most, it was a small, tired shop, but her eyes softened as if she saw more. "May I sit?" she asked. Claire nodded, and soon they were both at the small table by the window, steam rising from hastily poured cups of tea. For a moment, they sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the space. "You said talented," Caroline began. "Not just skilled, talented. That cake last night wasn't set about technique. It was about heart. People tasted it. That's why the story spread." Claire lowered her eyes, embarrassed. "I've always loved baking, but running a business," she shook her head. "The bills, the marketing, the bookkeeping. I've terrible at it. I never wanted to be a businesswoman. I just wanted to make cakes that meant something." Caroline leaned forward, direct but not unkind. "That's exactly why you need help. If you keep doing this alone, you sell drown, orders will pile up, customers will get frustrated, and the very soul that makes your baking special will burn out." Claire's shoulders tensed. She had already felt the exhaustion of one overwhelming day. What would weeks of this be like? Yet the thought of handing over control, letting the business become something unrecognizable, terrified her. I can become a factory," she whispered. "That's not who I am." Caroline Sest's expression softened. She reached across the table, locking eyes with Claire. "I know, and I don't want you to be. Listen carefully. I don't want to turn you into a factory. I want to keep your soul in it." The sincerity disarmed Claire. No landlord, no banker, no supplier had ever spoken to her like this. Only numbers, deadlines, invoices. Caroline was talking about something else entirely. "What are you suggesting?" Claire asked cautiously. "A partnership," Caroline replied. "I'll invest in the bakery. I'll handle logistics, marketing, orders, scheduling, supplies, staff. You won't have to worry about the things you hate. All I ask is that you keep baking with the honesty that made that cake what it was." Claire stared, stunned. "Why?" she whispered finally. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Caroline smiled faintly. "Because I've been searching for something real. I've spent years reviewing restaurants that look perfect but feel empty, food that photographs beautifully but tastes like nothing. Your cake, it reminded me why I fell in love with food. I don't want that to disappear. Savannah doesn't want that to disappear." Silence hung between them, thick with possibility. Claire thought of her grandmother's notebook, the crack in the display glass, the long nights she'd wondered if any of it mattered. For the first time, the path ahead didn't look like a dead end. Her chest tightened with fear, but underneath was a flicker of hope. "Hope," she whispered. Slowly, she nodded. "All right." Then louder, Caroline encouraged. "Yes," Claire said quietly. "I'll do it." Caroline's smile widened as she extended her hand. Claire reached out, fingers clasping firmly. That handshake marked the start of something new, not just for the bakery, but for Claire herself. She had thought she was at the end. Instead, she had turned the page. Sitting together, with the scent of sugar and tea lingering, the future felt possible. A year later, the bakery on Whitaker Street bore little resemblance to the tired shop that had hovered on the edge of closure. The name's Sweet Moment gleamed in polished letters above the doorway. The glass was spotless, the crack replaced. Each morning, as the sun rose over Savannah and light filtered through moss-draped oaks, a line had already formed outside the door. Locals, tourists, families, and couples waited patiently, some carrying magazines with Caroline Montgomery's article folded inside. Inside, the air buzzed with energy. Claire Bennett no longer worked alone. Young apprentices in crisp aprons moved with coordinated care, carrying trays, frosting cakes, kneading dough under her watchful eye. Stainless steel mixers hummed, ovens opened and closed, timers beeped in a chorus that once would have overwhelmed her. Now it was music. The bakery had expanded, new ovens, larger refrigerators, racks gleaming with fresh pans. Caroline had kept her promise. She had invested, managed the chaos, and turned Claire's fragile dream into something sustainable. Yet nothing essential had changed. The recipes were still Claire's, the standards were still hers. She moved among her apprentices, correcting wrist angles, steadying piping bags, tasting custards. When a young baker grew flustered and smeared frosting unevenly, Claire placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Slow down," she said softly. Dawn set skimp on the soul. Every cake might be someone's most important memory. It had become her mantra, passed down from her grandmother, and now etched into her team's minds. Baking had never been about volume or speed. It was about reverence for ingredients and for the people who would share each slice, tasting the love baked into it. Sweet Moments' success spread beyond Savannah. Articles appeared in regional magazines. Food bloggers queued for interviews. Wedding planners recommended her cakes as heirlooms. Orders poured in from nearby towns, once astonishingly from Atlanta. Yet Claire never lost sight of the heart of her work. Each cake still whispered, not shouted. That spring, a familiar name appeared on her order list. The Montgomery family. Evelyn Montgomery was turning 81, and the family wanted to celebrate in a way that honored the previous year's miracle. This time the party would not be shadowed by disappointment or forgotten orders. They wanted Claire to create the centerpiece, not as a rescue, but as a cherished tradition. On the day of the celebration, Claire and her team carried the cake carefully into the rented hall. The room glowed with warm light, tables draped in white linens, vases filled with lilies and roses. Children darted between adults, laughter bouncing off the walls. Claire entered, steady hands gripping the stand bearing the cake. Conversations hushed. Heads turned. The cake was 3 tiers tall. Cream cheese frosting smooth as porcelain, edges sharp and elegant. At the top, a sugar rose bloomed, delicate and luminous, crafted with the same patience Claire had shown a year ago. Under the chandelier it seemed to glow, fragile yet eternal. Gasps rippled through the room, phones discreetly lifted to capture perfection. Evelyn, seated near the head of the table, pressed her hand to her chest. Tears brimmed before the cake even reached her. Thomas stood beside her, posture straighter than it had been in years. Claire placed the cake carefully on the central table. He cleared his throat. "Last year," Thomas began, voice thick with emotion, "this young woman didn't just save my wife's birthday. She saved our family." The words struck like a bell. Guests erupted in applause, thunderous and heartfelt. Evelyn's tears flowed freely, her smile radiant as she looked from the cake to her husband, then to Claire, standing there in her flour-dusted apron. Claire felt her throat tighten. The applause and praise were overwhelming. She had never been comfortable with grand gestures, yet in that moment, with dozens of faces turned toward her, she felt something shift inside. She thought of the night she had almost walked away forever, when the shelves had been empty and her future looked like ash, and of the fragile rose she had placed on that first cake, unaware it would bloom into this. The applause swelled again. Evelyn reached for Claire Sepp's hand. Her grip was strong, her voice a whisper but clear. "You gave me back joy, and you gave this family something we shall never forget." Claire nodded, heart full. She had baked countless cakes since that night. But this moment reminded her why she began in the first place. Not for money, not for reputation, but for love. The celebration continued with laughter and music, but the cake remained the centerpiece. Every guest who tasted it murmured in awe, savoring not only the flavor but the story it carried. The 3 tears were more than sponge and frosting. They were proof that second chances could blossom into legacies. For Claire, standing quietly at the edge of the room, it was enough. Evelyn's tears of joy and Thomas's steady voice were everything she needed. The last guests drifted out into Savannah's warm night. The cake had been reduced to crumbs, but its presence lingered in the glow of the evening. Evelyn remained at the head of the table, shawl draped loosely, eyes brighter than in years. As Claire gathered her utensils, Evelyn reached for her hand. Though delicate, it carried surprising strength. Claire stopped, startled, looking into her face. "Your hands do miracles," Evelyn whispered, voice low but resonant. "Guard this gift. Don't ever let anyone take it from you." Claire's breath caught. For a moment she couldn't speak. She simply nodded, pressing Evelyn's hand gently, carrying the weight of the words into her heart. A blessing, a charge, and a promise all at once. Stepping into the night, the air thick with magnolia, Claire walked slowly back to her bakery, thinking of the journey that had brought her here, the landlord letters, the bank notices, the silent nights in an empty shop. They had nearly convinced her the dream was gone. But hearing Thomas, feeling Evelyn's hand in hers, she realized dreams didn't die. They waited for faith, for courage, for a chance to be reborn. The following week, Sweet Moment was busier than ever. Evelyn's birthday story spread, adding to the legend Caroline's article had started. People came not just for pastries, they came for the story, for the soul baked into every crumb. One evening, after the last customer left, Claire sat across from Caroline in the softly lit bakery. Display cases gleamed, the air thick with vanilla and sugar. "You realize what you've built, don't you?" Caroline asked, lifting her tea. Claire laughed softly. "I didn't build this alone. You pushed me. You believed in me when I didn't set. I only held up a mirror," Caroline replied. "You were always this. You just needed the world to see it." Through the front windows, silhouettes of people formed a line outside. Some leaned against lampposts, chatting softly. Others stood in eager anticipation. It wasn't morning yet, but they were willing to wait. Sweet Moment had become more than a bakery. It was a destination. Claire leaned back, letting the sight wash over her. The neon sign above glowed warmly over the faces gathered outside. A year ago, the windows reflected only emptiness. Now they reflected community, hope, and proof that her grandmother had been right. A cake should whisper, not shout. She looked at Caroline, whispering, "A single cake can change a life when it's made with love." Caroline nodded, softened, "And sometimes it changes more than one." The bell above the door jingled, clear and bright. Claire turned, heart leaping. Once a sound of anxiety, it now rang like a promise of beginnings, opportunities, and a future unfolding. Claire smiled, rising from her chair as the door opened and night air rushed in. Outside, the line shifted forward, voices rising with anticipation. Inside, Sweet Moment stood ready, ovens warm, counters shining, soul intact. The bell settled back into silence, and Claire Bennett knew with absolute certainty this was only the beginning.